We have three parts to tonight's event. We have three proposals for President Trump. We couldn't have timed it better. First, we already have Jade Wally online. He has over 27 years of experience in PwC's assurance and global capital markets practices in Tulsa, London, Houston, and Denver, serving clients in the consumer products and energy industries. He specializes in midstream, MLP and exploration and production, as well as consumer products and technology. Jade holds a Bachelor and Master of Science degrees in accounting from Oklahoma State University with a minor in international business. He serves on the Americans for Fair Taxation Board of Directors and the OSU School of Accounting Advisory Board. Jade is a CPA licensed in Oklahoma, Texas, and Colorado. The next speaker will be Eric Nager. Most likely he'll go last. He has worked closely with his brother, Terry, at Southern Capital Services for over 20 years and has been a big part of Plan for America from early on. Eric earned his MBA from the University of South Alabama, a master's in history from Harvard, and carries the CRPS designation. While working at Southern Capital Services, Eric has also held a seat at City Councilman of Daphne, Alabama, and completed his 30 years of service in the U.S. Army Reserve. And then there's me, and I'll play a very minor role. I'm a professor of economics here at Northwood University. What I will do is serve as a proxy. I will present on behalf of Jose Piñera. I had the pleasure of giving lectures with him with the Free Market Roadshow this spring. Jose Piñera is a distinguished senior fellow and co-chairman of Cato's Project on Social Security Choice and founder and president of the International Center for Pension Reform. Formerly Chile's Secretary of Labor and Social Security, he was the architect of the country's successful reform of its pension system. You'll learn more about him when I do my part. So Jade, they've already seen the two short videos you have on the Fairtax website, and they're yours.
And Alex, only question, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you perfectly well, and the room can hear you well, so we have a go.
I'll try to go to the bottom of the hour here. Hi everyone. It's good to see your smiling faces. I'm sure you guys are thrilled to be here. Hope you're doing well. My name's Jade Wally, as you heard Alex introduce me. So let's get right into the fair tax and what the heck it is and really what the heck it isn't. So obviously you've heard it's a national sales tax. It would completely replace the IRS. So I like to say, well, what isn't the fair tax? It's not an income tax. It's not a regressive payroll tax. So if you guys, any of you have received a paycheck, can I see hands? Anyone received a paycheck at a job yet? Okay, so y'all know what that dirty word FICA is and the Social Security and Medicare withheld from your paychecks. That's what we call the payroll tax, which actually brings in about 40% of our U.S. Treasury's receipts. It's super regressive, meaning that it hurts everyone, especially the working poor, because it's a flat amount, no matter how much you make. So what the fair tax isn't is an income tax. It isn't a payroll tax, aka keep your whole paycheck. It isn't death tax, aka the estate tax. It isn't a corporate income tax rate or income tax. So think back in the past 10 years, we've had many companies relocate to, say, Ireland because they had a corporate tax rate really low, 12.5%. Imagine if the US is the corporate tax haven of the world with a 0% corporate income tax rate. That's what the fair tax brings here. So a few principles with the fair tax. It's simple. It's effective. We'll talk about it, but it brings illegal evasion down 95%. And when I talk about illegal evasion, you might hear it talked about as the tax gap, what the law says we should collect based on the 90,000 pages of IRS code versus what we actually collect. It's about $1 trillion short every year, 1 trillion. Fair tax would eliminate 95% of that. Think about the IRS. Depending on how you look at it, around 90,000 employees, legislated for quite a bit more here with laws passed in the past couple of years. That 12 to 15 billion-dollar budget goes away. We don't need the IRS anymore. You will have a small contingent of U.S. Treasury folks to actually collect what the vendors and the states bring in through the fair tax, but in my estimate, 5% would be overly liberal as far as the estimate of how many of those 90,000 people and $15 billion a year in our budget that we'd need, or that we currently have with the IRS. So let's talk about this real quick. The video talked about this. The fair tax is not regressive because the prebate results in a direct deposit, that the fair tax presumes you pay on the basic necessities of life. So the reality is that we need to spend up to the Department of Health and Human Services poverty level to realistically live. It's about 40,000 a year for a family of 4 right now. That means that if the fair tax rate were, say, let's just say 20%, 8,000 would be direct deposited into every legal U.S. resident's bank account each year. Of course, divide by 12 to make the deposits monthly. And that effectively, and it's really simple math, all you need is addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. You can see that the fair tax, even though it would be a one rate for all purchases, would actually be more progressive, less regressive than our income tax. And again, it comes back, even though our income tax rate is graduated, meaning the more the better you do, the harder stick you get swung at your backside, and you get more swats, and they swing harder as you earn more because your rate goes up. But the payroll tax is the single reason 40% of our U.S. Treasury's receipts, it's so regressive that it actually turns the math against the income and payroll tax system when you look at it together. So who pays the tax if we go to the fair tax? Everyone in the U.S., whether we're citizens visiting here for tourism, legally immigrating here, or staying here illegally, when you spend money on new goods and services, you're paying the fair tax at the register or at the Amazon checkout online. I'm sure some of you are already thinking how virtually 100% of people residing in the U.S. illegally are not filing Form 1040 for their annual tax returns with the IRS. Now, with the fair tax, everyone in the U.S. will pay their full federal burden of taxes due. You might say, well, Jade, what if I buy used goods? A key tenet of the fair tax is that the fair tax is fair. This means that items are taxed once and only once at that new kind of end user retail level. So if you buy a used car, you're not paying the fair tax. If you buy a used home, about 90% of US homes sold are used, you don't pay the fair tax. Really, 2 of your major lifetime expenditures you can legally avoid the fair tax. The used good markets are expected to explode under the fair tax, stimulating a recycling renaissance where our environment is protected in new ways that previously our politicians could only dream of. It's really the most elegant recycling bill ever drafted. Think about gently used resale shops, tools, clothes, furniture, etc. It'll be a boon and bring up a lot of good business opportunities as well. So how is the fair tax collected? It's collected by vendors at the retail level only. So think about business to business sales of goods and widgets. They don't have to worry about the fair tax, only at that end user retail level. So think like Walmart, Home Depot, Amazon. So just like retailers currently collect the sales taxes, right now 98% of the US population pays the sales tax in one of the states they live in. Vendors will then remit their state sales tax, the fair tax, up to their state sales tax authority. So not only their state sales tax is collected, but also the federal fair tax. But here's a nuance: they get to keep 1/4% of those funds as a collection fee. This is to make that math sound a little bit more real, about $2,500 for every 1 million collected and remitted. So it gives them a little incentive. In big retailers like Home Depot and Walmart, that could be very big. The states then remit the federal fair tax collected to the U.S. Treasury each month, and they keep a quarter of 1% of these funds as a collection fee for their efforts. And compare this to the 155 million individual and 100 million small business, sole proprietorships, corporations, what have you, 100 million businesses in the U.S. that are basically collectors, and each one of us are basically collectors for the individual income tax system. And I'm not sure about you, but I don't ever recall being entitled to a collector's fee for the thousands I send to the IRS every year. The vendors collect the sales tax at the register, and the fair tax specifically calls for the amount of the fair tax to be delineated on your receipt. So you can always tell how much you're paying in fair tax. And I suppose if you were so inclined, if you're a masochist, you could save all your receipts and calculate how much in federal fair tax you paid for the year, minus your prebate. But the great thing is you don't have to under the fair tax. There will be 250 million people in the US paying the fair tax almost every day. And yet the payment of your fair share of the federal income tax burden will be completely anonymous. If there are any issues with tax remittance violations, the vendors are the ones who have to answer, not the consumer. With the fair tax reimbursed for your necessities needed to survive and live, thanks to the rebate we talked about, your true unreimbursed federal tax expenditures are finally voluntary rather than compulsory. So that means, again, you've got to spend up to the poverty level to live, right? You gotta have a roof over your head, some water, some milk, some cereal, maybe a 6-pack of beer every once in a while. But anything you spend beyond that, it's completely voluntary, right? Because in theory, you don't need anything beyond that. If you do, it's more of a luxury, and that's where the fair tax comes in. And then it's really our choice as opposed to being shoved down your throat. Um, so let's see here. The fair tax only taxes us at the retail level, like we said, where new goods and services are purchased or consumed. So this means that of the approximately 100 million total U.S. businesses we talked about, there's about only 2.5% of those are retail businesses. Only 2.5 million businesses, the math's easy, of the 100 million businesses would need to collect the fair tax. This then also means that the vast preponderance of businesses have absolutely no tax compliance cost, no tax burden, and no tax remittances whatsoever. And you guys might have seen some posts from Elon here recently in this new DOGE committee, the Department of Government Efficiency. Anyone see all this with him and Vivek? And he actually put a stat in there about how it takes us 6.5 billion hours a year to comply with the income tax code. And I forgot to tell you earlier what the fair tax isn't. It isn't a system that has what we call the IRS. It doesn't have 6.5 billion hours of compliance costs each year. And we collect 95% more than what we do now if we think about that illegal evasion. So remember, I think Elon's wanting to cut 2 trillion. Fair tax does over 1 trillion of it by itself by eliminating the vast majority of illegal evasion and eliminating the IRS and that $15 billion behemoth. So it's quite interesting. Elon and Vivek could get a good head start just by implementing the fair tax. So let's talk about these 2.5 million US retail businesses. They'll be the ground floor collection agency of our US Treasury. Only 15%, around 375,000 businesses, comprise 90 to 95% of all US goods and services. So large companies such as Walmart, Best Buy, Whole Foods, Sprouts, McDonald's, and Apple is where the vast majority of our retail dollars are spent. Compare this now to the 100 million US businesses and 155 million individual family income tax filers, all of which are effectively collection agents for the IRS, all with a massive inherent conflict of interest, by the way, if we're, collecting and determining how much we owe. All that goes away. And this has led to our $1 trillion illegal evasion each year. So all is great, Jade. 1 trillion illegal evasion, it goes down to 50 billion a year. Because I always say, as long as humans are involved, you're going to have some cheating, right? Welcome to humanity. Welcome to a fallen world. The lawn guy might say, hey, pay me in cash and I won't charge you the fair tax. But 50 billion versus a trillion, that's a huge difference. Again, never going to have perfection. So you say, well, this sounds too good to be true. How does that work? Well, the big real difference here, and if you're taking notes, and if Dr. Alex is going to quiz you later, the tax base would be 9 trillion under the fair tax, 5 trillion under our income tax. And I always say income comes from income. So our income tax system, they're going to tax income. What is the fair tax? What does spending, consumption come from? It comes from it comes from income, it comes from savings, it comes from borrowing, it even comes from theft. Think of the folks here illegally or illegal criminal gang rings and prostitution and all the dirty things that no one wants to talk about in proper company. But they will be paying their full federal burden as well. Since only legal U.S. residents receive the prebate, the fair tax will be an enormous force for expanding legal immigration into the U.S. This is projected not in small part due to the fact that, based on numerous PhD studies that support unprecedented economic growth under the fair tax enactment, for example, 11% GDP growth in 10 years, the need for more workers in the U.S. will be tremendous as the U.S. will be the world's tax haven. Virtually all studied economists agree that three things will promote economic growth: replacing the income tax with a consumption tax, check; replacing a graduated rate system with a flat marginal tax rate system, check; and lower marginal rates and a broader tax base. We just talked 9 trillion versus 5 trillion, check, check, check. The fair tax delivers on all three of these tenets. It looks like we've got just a few more minutes. So one other thing I like to highlight is freedom. Who here would rather have freedom to do what the heck you want, whether it's, maybe log on and play some Xbox video games, go hang with your friends, have a beer, have some food, or would you rather have everything dictated to you and have absolutely no freedom whatsoever? Who would vote freedom? Raise your hand. Okay, generally, this is a freedom-loving audience here. I like that. I'm glad that you guys aren't preparing to enroll in a communist country here. So you guys are doing good. Well, what about freedom in the fair tax? Let's talk about it from the inverse perspective. What about the income tax? The income tax inhibits almost half of our Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Can you believe that? What the heck are you talking about, Jade? The First Amendment, free speech, right? Well, Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1954 passed an amendment called the Johnson Amendment that prohibits 501c3 not-profit organizations from endorsing or opposing political candidates. What is that effectively? An inhibition of free speech. You can't say what's on your heart or your mind. Churches can't talk about politics or candidates. It inhibits free speech, our income tax system. What about the Fourth Amendment, illegal search and seizure? Um, there's a nasty term you've probably heard of called civil asset forfeiture. And it's based on this arcane legal concept called in rem, REM. And it means the IRS can, without even notifying you, if they suspect, structuring, and bank tellers turn you in because you're making large cash deposits, they can just go seize your bank account without you even knowing about it. Illegal search and seizure. Usually with any other aspect of U.S. law, the government can't just come take your stuff. It's anti-freedom. It's anti-United States. They can do it with the income tax because that in rem concept we talked about, it it's based on this concept that that cash actually has done the illegal bidding, has done the crime, not you. So they're not really persecuting you. They're just confiscating the cash which was involved and did the crime. It's ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. And actually, when you look at all the math on these cases, about 91% of seizures were seized from people doing nothing wrong, even without accusation. The IRS determined it was easier to grab some money from honest people than the hard work needed to go after the real criminals. Ultimately, the IRS often and usually admits that the victim did nothing wrong after bankrupting the company or causing them years of disruption of their lives, businesses, legal fees, and hassles to fight the IRS claims. The IRS legal fees, by the way, are being paid by the very victim that they are pursuing, through tax dollars, which is even more ironic and perverse. Um, so the Fourth Amendment obviously required a warrant to be issued if there's probable cause. IRS doesn't have to deal with this. Let's go quickly to the Fifth Amendment, due process. We cannot deprive the individual of life, liberty, or property. It also says private property should not be taken for public use without just compensation. We all know the Fifth Amendment. Due process requires the government provide accused citizens a clear notice of a claim against them and allow them a hearing before executing enforcement action. But the IRS engages in many summary judgments and enforces them prior to any judicial determinations. You're guilty, you're presumed guilty until proven innocent. It's backwards. It's backwards under the income tax. Also, the Fifth Amendment guarantees us the right not to be forced to self-incriminate. You don't have to testify against yourself. What are we doing with our income tax returns when you're forced to fill out certain pieces of information on a tax form to the federal government? You're being forced, in a manner of speaking, to self-incriminate. Let's go to the Sixth Amendment, the jury of peers and speedy public trial rights. Do we have this in IRS courts? Despite the Sixth and Seventh Amendment actually that guarantees the trial by jury, the federal tax system sidesteps such protections. To contest an IRS tax calculation prior to assessment, one must file a petition in a U.S. tax court. But since this is an administrative court, not an Article III court, no jury trial is required. To obtain a jury trial and related rights for civil tax cases, one must file suit in a U.S. district court. But before that can happen, the alleged tax, penalties, and interest must be paid in full. It's ridiculous. Lastly, I know we need to go, Alex. The 14th Amendment, what does that guarantee? It guarantees equal protection under the law. So when every citizen, depending on their circumstances, is forced to pay different amounts based on the income tax bracket they're in, it's technically not equal protection under the law, and the 14th Amendment is violated. I know we're up against time constraints here, Alex. I'll stop here and see if we have any questions I might be able to answer.
Newsweek article that advocated for privatizing our social security system based on advice from Jose Piñera. I already told you I had the honor of meeting him in May when we both spoke at the Free Market Roadshow in Vienna and Budapest. As a graduate student of economics, Piñera fell in love with the American idea, and I teach a course on that. 30 years later, I took the same intellectual journey. After he earned his PhD at Harvard in 1974, it's 50 years ago, Piñera went back to help Chile rebuild its economy, an economy which was destroyed by Marxist and Keynesian policies. He was called to serve as Secretary of Labor and Social Security. By 1980, he managed to create a fully funded system of personal retirement accounts. The significance of these reforms was noticed by historian Niall Ferguson in a book that I recommend you all read. It's called The Ascent of Money. Niall Ferguson describes it as the most profound challenge to the welfare state in a generation. Thatcher and Reagan came later. The backlash against welfare started in Chile. After his trip to the United States, Tocqueville, that was almost 2 centuries ago, Tocqueville warned that, I quote, "The American Republic will endure until politicians realize that they can bribe the people with their own money." It happened to Rome. As we all know, with the rise of progressivism a century ago, the culture of self-reliance and individual responsibility that had made America a great and free nation was diluted by entitlement inspired by the failed European welfare state. While America was adopting bad ideas from other parts of the world, it was also exporting its own glorious founding tenets of free enterprise, limited government, and the rule of law. In Chile, this happened through a group of young free market economists educated in America by some of the greatest champions for liberty, like Milton Friedman. I'm talking about the Chicago boys. Joining the team, Piñera dreamed of implementing an emblematic social security reform. After ensuring the stability of the free market model in his country, Piñera dedicated his life to sharing the Chilean model around the world, and he's doing it to this day. I hope to tour again with him in the spring of next year. At the beginning of 1995, Ed Crane, co-founder and president of the Libertarian Cato Institute, invited him to become a distinguished senior fellow and co-chairman of its Social Security Choice Project. In the following years, Piñera traveled around the United States sharing the Chilean experience in conferences, town hall meetings, congressional hearings, and media interviews. The audiences were extremely receptive and interested, but what Friedman called the tyranny of the status quo made it difficult for politicians, for political leaders to embrace such a new solution to its growing Social Security program. In 1996, President Clinton's chief of staff traveled to Chile to explore the success of the first private personal account systems in the world. A few weeks later, he wrote the following to Piñera: "José, without a doubt, the reform of Chile's pension system has been a critical contributing factor, some have called it the mother of all reforms, to Chile's ongoing economic success. The Social Security reforms that you developed and fought for have put your country on a stable footing for the future. I believe we can learn a great deal from your country's bold initiative, which is widely envied throughout the hemisphere." In his 1998 State of the Union address, President Clinton warned the nation of the coming Social Security crisis and called for reforms. I quote, "All the American people who are watching us tonight should be invited to join in this discussion. And 1 year from now, I will convene the leaders of Congress to craft historic bipartisan legislation to achieve a landmark for our generation, a Social Security system that is strong in the 21st century." 3 months later, the Wall Street Journal published a letter from Piñera. This is the letter. "Dear President Clinton, you publicly recognize that the US Social Security system is going broke. You are right. Like the Titanic, it is heading toward disaster. Will some keep insisting that there is no problem? The truth is that the US has only 2 options: to prolong the agony of the current system or, as you have said, to experiment boldly. But so far, only short-term solutions have been proposed. Some have suggested raising the payroll tax, but this would hurt job creation and increase the burden of a regressive tax on low-income workers. Others recommend increasing the retirement age, but that would especially burden blue-collar workers. These half measures can only buy time. If the ship doesn't change course, sooner or later, you're going to hit an iceberg, an aging population that cannot be supported by the workforce. There is another way. In Chile, we saved our Social Security system by converting it from a pay-as-you-go model to individual retirement savings accounts. Workers now choose among competing private companies to invest the equivalent of what used to be their payroll taxes in a conservative portfolio of high-rated bonds and equities. This allows workers to harness the powerful force of compound interest, reflecting the wealth-creating effect of the market, to ensure their security in retirement. If empowering the common man, turning every worker into a shareholder, were the only benefit of such reform, that would be reason enough to convert to individual retirement accounts. But the Chilean example gives many more reasons. In the 17 years since Chile embarked on this course, complemented by other important market reforms, a flood of investment has benefited both individuals and the economy as a whole. As unemployment has fallen to its lowest level in history, productivity has increased sharply. The savings rate has soared to around 25% of gross domestic product and economic growth has more than doubled to a 7% average during the last 13 years. If we keep up the present rhythm for another 7 years, the size of the economy will have quadrupled in only 20 years. This is a real economic and social revolution, allowing the country to improve education, health, and the environment to a previously unthinkable level. This success has led 7 other Latin American countries, Argentina, Bolivia, Colombia, El Salvador, Mexico, Peru, and Uruguay, to emulate our example in the last 5 years. Several Central and Eastern European countries, including Russia, are considering similar reforms. Of course, there are political challenges that inevitably lie in the path of any important reform, in particular gaining public support and managing the transition. Let me share with you the lessons I learned from the Chilean experience. First and foremost, policymakers must emphasize the benefits to ordinary citizens. Transforming Social Security into an investment vehicle will boost the wealth of the US economy, as many experts have calculated, but that won't capture the imagination of voters. The general public must understand that they will benefit from the ownership of wealth through the capital markets, giving them far more independence and freedom. This reform is about citizen empowerment. The public must understand that individual retirement accounts will help the poor. High-wage earners can always save for their own retirement, but medium and low-income workers don't have spare cash to save in separate individual retirement accounts. They suffer the most with negligible returns on their Social Security payments. They will gain the most from a system that allows them to invest the value of what was their payroll taxes in real assets. Of course, there should still be a safety net provided from general tax revenues. Even though the reform is revolutionary, the execution must be conservative. Financial soundness and prudent regulations should be paramount in the design system. Make the reform optional. Okay, I repeat, that reform is optional. Give those who are already in the government system the option of staying with it or moving to the new system. So you're not forced to abandon the system if you like it. Those who move should receive a recognition bond for their past contributions. In this way, the new system is not compulsory. Make it absolutely clear that the elderly will not be harmed by the reform. On grounds of both fairness and prudence, I recommend guaranteeing the benefits of the elderly currently receiving Social Security and of those who decide to stay in the government system. That would be a move forward, since those benefits are now subject to reduction by political whim. The country should be assured that the transition from the old system can be financed. True, the nation will have to foot the bill for current benefits while payroll tax revenues dwindle. But these expenses are sunk costs. They will have to be paid whether the system is reformed or not. When a worker moves out of the government system, payroll tax revenues will decline, but so will future liabilities, because that worker will no longer be accumulating rights to further benefits. In the long run, the burden of the system will be reduced. Budget surpluses present a historic opportunity to begin financing the transition. We had those budget surpluses back in the 1990s. Take this message to the people. Political support will be forthcoming if people have good information. a Cato Institute website, allows one to calculate returns on the government program and compare returns on equivalent savings invested in the market. You can do it on your own tonight if you wish. It's www.socialsecurity.org. Cynics can discount political calculations all they want. Mathematical ones are more difficult to ignore. Policymakers must seize the day. The longer they wait, the more difficult change becomes. Every year, the unfunded liability expands. Countries that phase out their tax and spend social security systems and move toward investment-based schemes become more competitive with a growing capital base, lower labor costs, and eventually lower taxes. The global social security crisis is creating the opportunity for a fundamental shift regarding the role of government in modern societies. Transforming it can be a massive blow against the economic drag of the welfare state that has stifled the creative spirit of mankind for too long. Piñera gave the following testimony at a White House summit on Social Security in December of 1998. I was getting ready for my first semester at SIU around that time. This is what Piñera testified. We began a social security system in 1925, 10 years before FDR began it in the United States. In the face of the approaching financial bankruptcy of our system in 1980, there were two extreme positions. One was not to change the system, to prolong the agony, to tinker at the edges. The other was to completely dismantle the system and leave everyone alone, facing the choices of old age. We chose to save Social Security with individual retirement accounts. Every Chilean worker has a pension passbook. They know every month how much they have. We have allowed the working poor to benefit from the extraordinary force of compound interest. When they retire, they cannot withdraw the savings as a lump sum and risk losing it. They have to change it into an annuity that is indexed for inflation with family provisions to take care of widows and orphans. We created a supervisory board to avoid fraud. We placed very strict rules for portfolio diversification. In 1998, the stock market went down 25% because of the Asian crisis. But the return rate on the pension funds in Chile went down only 2.5%, 10 times less. We also instituted a safety net, a guaranteed minimum income for every worker. This is financed by general tax revenues and therefore is very progressive. We gave every worker the choice to stay in the old system if they didn't like this very small element of market risk and preferred the demographic or political risk. Or they could move to the new system with recognition bonds, recognizing their past contributions. Guess what? 93% of Chilean workers chose the passbook rather than the pay-as-you-go system. We kept part of the payroll tax in the pay-as-you-go system in order to finance the elderly benefits. We used the budget surplus, as the president is suggesting in this country. And finally, we cut all corporate welfare. That money should be used to finance the national retirement system. In Chile, no one was investing in stocks 18 years ago. In America, 40% are already investing in stocks. I have enormous hope, said Piñera, for this country that I love. 2 months later, President Clinton said in his 1999 State of the Union address, "Our fiscal discipline gives us an unsurpassed opportunity to address a remarkable new challenge, the aging of America." We just covered it with my Economics of Public Policy students, the Graying of America, the chapter. I told you it's serendipitous that we have this Freedom Seminar event tonight. With the number of elderly Americans set to double by 2030, the baby boom will become a senior boom. The best way to keep Social Security a rock-solid guarantee is not to make drastic cuts in benefits, not to raise payroll tax rates. I propose, that's Bill Clinton, a Democratic president, I propose that we use a little over 11% of the surplus to establish universal savings accounts, USA accounts. This was the first time that a sitting president had called for the creation of personal retirement accounts. What killed the reform? Long story short, the Lewinsky scandal. You're probably too young to know anything about it. Clinton lied under oath and he got impeached. Thus, he exhausted his political capital and his resolve to tackle major reforms. He couldn't spearhead any major legislation during the remainder of his term. The Social Security time bomb was passed to his successor. A vital opportunity was squandered over sex. Well, we don't run surpluses now, so financially we are at a disadvantage. That was a great time for us to do it. We are in a much more difficult situation today, but if Trump wants to do it, all he needs to point out to the other party is that it was their idea. Their president, Clinton, ran on such a promise. Okay? He wanted to reform it first. And if Trump takes that path, if he seeks bipartisan support, in addition to eliminating the income tax and the IRS, I think we can also save Social Security. This is the time to dream big, guys. Thank you for your attention. Now you have to do the same thing. You tell me what you like about this proposal and what you don't like, how it might impact you personally or the US economy in a positive or a negative way. Once again, small group discussion, and then give me your thoughts. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me in, and thank you for your flexibility in the scheduling. Thank you to Northwood University for inviting me. The commuting home from Boston is not for the faint of heart. I don't necessarily recommend it, but this is now a good time. We can talk about what a better way to give your evening and a weeknight than to talk about tax reform and entitlement reform and all kinds of great topics like that. And I heard part of the previous presentation about the Chilean model, which is a fantastic model as part of the inspiration for Plan for America. Plan for America also includes healthcare reform because healthcare is about 85% of the problem in terms of debts and deficits, unfunded liabilities. So we'll dive right in over the next 30 minutes or so. And at the end of that, I'm happy to entertain any questions. But I'll be throwing a lot at you. This is a big plan, and we feel that tweaking the current system won't fundamentally solve the problem, whether it's means testing or raising the retirement age won't get us to where we need to be because the deficits are just so large. So how do we get in this mess? I'll just briefly touch upon it. Once upon a time, we had what we called a lockbox, where all the payroll taxes went to fund Social Security and Medicare. But the politicians of both parties over the years broke it open and spent it on other things, such that there's nothing in the lockbox right now, also known as the Social Security Trust Fund, except for non-negotiable IOUs of the US government. So it's really just like saying the system is bankrupt now. You will hear those on television and pundits say, well, the system is solvent until the 2030s. And then there'll be cuts to the entitlements. But really, we have to borrow the money right now for the payouts to the current system. So it's really not in a good place. And both major party candidates in the last election campaigned on no changes to the current system, which basically means severe cuts within the decade if nothing is done. So your generation may have to lead the charge here. And just by a show of hands, I can see the class. Show of hands, how many of you think you will get back from Social Security what you pay into it? Raise your hands. Well, I'm not seeing any hands. All right, so we need to do something else. Now, I want to, first of all, talk about some of the credentials of our plan. It's really designed to be a nonpartisan plan because, you know, in this polarized time, whatever one party wants, the other party will kind of reflexively hate. And so we think that prosperity will unite us. And this plan is designed to appeal really to all sides of the political spectrum. So from the left side, our friends on the left, true liberal, would like that our plan democratizes wealth, closes the income gap between rich and poor. That's a big talking point on the left. It would require better corporate governance on the so-called Wall Street fat cats. You know, there'd be more scrutiny of them. There'd be universal health care with no out-of-pocket costs for low-income Americans. The left has long talked about universal health care. And it will be single payer as well. It won't be public single payer, it'll be private single payer, but it's still single payer. And that's one thing, you know, Bernie Sanders has talked about for quite some time. And there will be a U.S. government guarantee. The U.S. government does have a role to play in this because a true liberal might not like it to be completely free market. So all those things should be why a liberal would like it. Now, on the other side, oops, I don't know. I didn't mean to do that. Sorry, is it looking too big on the screen now? There we go.
Oh, there you go. Perfect.
There we go. All right. Now, what about our conservative and libertarian friends? There got to be some goodies for them too, and there really are. Our plan would eliminate the federal and state debts, including the 150 plus trillion of unfunded liabilities. So getting rid of debt is always a good thing. There'd be a tax reduction for individuals and businesses and eventual elimination of all taxation under our plan. For our libertarian friends particularly, our plan is voluntary, not compulsory. You don't have to opt in. You can stay in the current system if you want to. Size of government diminishes and participants keep the wealth they've earned. No one pays for anyone else's health care, as is the case today. So those are some nonpartisan credentials. How did this idea come about? My brother Terry, one of the co-authors of the book, is a certified financial planner. That's what CFP stands for. He has been for over 40 years. And he put his financial planning hat on and said, what would be a reasonably comprehensive financial plan for every American citizen? That would include retirement. That would include investments, taxation, insurance, and estate planning. These are the 5 pillars of financial planning. And this plan provides a reasonably comprehensive one for every U.S. citizen. By the way, those of you who have the book, I also hope you will get the white paper. The white paper has since been updated since the book was published. The 3rd section of the book is the white paper, and the current white paper has more updated numbers. And you can go to our website to get the white paper if you don't have enough copies there to go around. And I have sent it to some folks there at Northwoods electronically as well. All right, when you have so much debt, how do you handle it? I mean, we can't get our arms around $1 trillion. It's a huge number. We have over 30 trillion in debt or deficit, and then the 150 trillion in unfunded liability. So how do you get rid of debt? Well, one is you can roll it over, meaning just defer paying it, refinance it basically, which at some point the music will stop and some people won't have a chair. You could try to inflate it away, as the previous, I guess still the current administration tried to do. That really is bad for the currency. And as you saw, it creates higher interest rates, which creates its own problem with federal spending. And I have a slide to show you later on that. You could also repudiate the debt, which is basically to say, I'm not going to pay it. And that has not worked out well for countries that have tried to do that. Really wouldn't go over well with the United States having the reserve currency of the world. So really the only viable option is the fourth one, to pay it off. And our plan does that over the next really less than 50 years probably. And it may seem like a long time, but the current path we're on, there is no light at the end of the tunnel. All right, here's the chart I promised to talk about government spending. There's an inside circle which talks about revenues, but I'm going to focus on the outside circle, which is federal expenditures. And my source of this is the Congressional Budget Office. The year 2024 just ended on September 30, so these are 2023 numbers, but you can see our total outlays as a nation were $6.1 trillion, 3.8 of which in the blue there was mandatory spending, like the entitlement programs. 3.8 of 6.1, that represents over 60%, about 62, 63% of the federal budget. And then if you look at the small sliver, the 0.7, that's interest on the debt. And when interest rates rise, that amount increases. So that's another significant percent. So you add that to the 3.8, you're really talking about 4.5. So roughly 3/4 of the federal debt is paid for either in mandatory entitlement spending or interest on the debt. Only the 1.7 trillion, the remaining part, is discretionary, which goes for defense and other important things. So that discretionary spending is increasingly getting squeezed out. So this topic is literally one of national security, because at some point we may not be able to provide an adequate defense if our discretionary spending keeps getting squeezed. So our plan proposes to enact a plan with a contract. A contract is harder to change than legislation. If this was just done by legislation, after another election, the other party takes over and legislation can be changed. The contract, it just makes it harder to change. And the contract would be among the federal government, the state governments, and a private trust to be established called the For America Security Trust, or the FAST. And there was a cool acronym in the previous talk too. So I hope you can keep all your acronyms straight by the end of the evening. So this contract would be enacted, and some of the terms of the contract is, see, everyone has to gain in a contract. There has to be enough goodies to make all parties want to sign the contract. So for the people, which would be represented by the FAST, the people would gain tax-favored retirement benefits, and I will explain that coming up. The people would also get universal, affordable, high-quality health care. In other words, better goodies than you're getting now in the current system. The federal government would get a great benefit as well, relief from the 150 trillion of unfunded liabilities. That would make it much easier to balance the budget. And there's really no other way they're going to get that gorilla off its back, off the government's back, without some plan like this. And the state governments benefit as well. They get relief from Medicare requirements and help with their public pensions, which some states are underwater in their pensions. They have obligations to pay their pensions to their retired teachers, firefighters, police, etc., and they don't have enough money in their pensions to pay them. I think Illinois is one state, California is another. So that's a big problem that is not really talked about a lot. All parties would gain from the contract. 4 provisions of the contract I'll just highlight here. For the people, all your retirement contributions, which really means your payroll taxes right now, for those of you who have a job, you know that 7.65% of your pay goes to the government for Social Security and Medicare, and the government, your employer matches that, another 7.65, so 15.2% is the payroll tax. Under our plan, that payroll tax would become a contribution, a tax deductible contribution to an account in your name, a personal account in your name, like a 401k plan. For corporations, all dividends would be tax deductible. and to corporations and tax-free to recipients. We want to encourage more companies to issue stock and not bonds, so that we're shifting our culture from one of debt to one of equity or ownership in corporate America. Another provision of the contract, the government guarantees the FAST debt and pays the interest on it. The FAST is going to have to borrow money initially to pay off the current retirees to Social Security, and the U.S. government would guarantee that debt. This would not be U.S. government debt, but be guaranteed by the U.S. government. And there's a funding mechanism here that the FAST would take 2% of all the assets in the account every year. And this rising cash flow would build up and eventually allow the FAST to pay off all the unfunded liabilities. And in the first year, the total payroll taxes are about $1 trillion a year. So 2% of that in the first year would be about 20 billion. And just imagine a growing 20 billion every year, plus whatever the market returns, it will grow up rapidly over time. So here's how it works on the retirement side, and then I'll illustrate how it works on the healthcare side. Those opting into the plan, as I suggested, will direct their 15.3%, their payroll tax will go into a personal account in their name. There won't be any investment choice. Okay, everything goes into an all market index of U.S. domiciled publicly traded companies. So this will encourage companies to be domiciled in the United States and get listed on the stock exchange, because corporations will love the fact that this $1 trillion flowing into the equity markets every year. They'll want to get a piece of that. And the third point there will be pretty much negligible to administer this, because you're talking about big money in an all market index. We could bid that out to BlackRock or Vanguard, companies that already administer large index funds, and they could do it for maybe 1 basis point, or which is 1/100th of 1% for you finance majors. And it would be almost costless to administer an all market index like that. Part of the contract also, at retirement age, you get the highest of 3 payouts. This is guaranteed. You get what Social Security would have been, which is probably going to be the lowest of the 3. I have an illustration show that coming up. The second option, or the second best scenario, is that you get 4% compounded annual rate of return over the entire life of your account, and the market should certainly do better than that. So it's most likely you will get 4% of actual market returns through times. In other words, when you retire, your account triggers a cash flow to you of at least 4% annually, or of 4% annually of the balance. And as the account grows, that 4% is a growing amount. So the market returns will help you achieve that. And the payout, incidentally, unlike Social Security, goes on in perpetuity to your heirs. So in other words, today under Social Security, when you die, your benefit stream goes to a spouse if you have one. If you don't have a spouse, or when your spouse passes, then Social Security ends, and that's it. You don't get any more money. In our plan, when you trigger a cash flow stream in retirement and you pass, the cash flow stream goes on to your heirs in perpetuity. So, and it's also tax-free. So it's way better than Social Security is today. Here's a quick graph of market returns through time. My source on this is Investopedia. And this shows that over basically, this is since 1928. So we're talking about, over 95 years that the market has averaged a 10% return. So for our model, the Congressional Budget Office only allows us to assume a 6.2% rate of return. But history suggests that you will more likely average closer to 10. So our assumptions are very conservative in the book and the white paper. We're assuming a return that's somewhere around 40% lower than historic market returns. And the reason our plan will still work at 6% or 6.2 is that being in retirement, you get a 4% payout, and then 2%, the funding mechanism goes to the FAST for to pay off debt. So that's why it still works at 6.2. You can see here on the end, there are some extreme years up and down. We'll talk about what happens in a down market cycle or a very bad market year. What our plan addresses that too. But much of the time, we're in the middle of the bell curve where, there are good returns, and there have been positive returns 68% of time over the last century almost. We're going to harness the markets to solve our problem. Now I'm going to illustrate with the case of a single mom. This is why would a 25-year-old want to join our plan? And you all, as you graduate college, you won't be too far away from this. So let's just assume a single mom who lives in the inner city. She works from age 25 to 65. She has a job that never pays her more than $25,000 a year, which is very modest. So at the end, when she hits retirement, she doesn't really have any other legacy other than Social Security. And her Social Security estimate would be about $14,676 a year. How would that compare to our plan? Well, in her FAST account, let's assume just a 6.2% rate of return. I'll also show you what would happen with a 10% average annual return over time. Well, let's just say she only averaged 6.2% for the entire 40 years. She would have a retirement balance at age 65 of almost $382,000. And the FAST payout, 4% of that would be her guaranteed minimum payout for the rest of her life, would be $15,273. It would also be tax-free, and it would be in perpetuity. The Social Security one would end at her passing. So you can see that it's more, it's tax-free. It's not a lot more, but let's look at the 10% scenario now. The Social Security estimate stays the same at the $14,676, but her FAST balance, if she averaged 10.2% a year, even earning only $25,000 a year her whole life, she'd have a FAST balance of $1.1 million. And her payout at retirement, 4% of that would be $45,000 a year, at least. I mean, if her balance grew, which we would expect it to over time, she would get raises over time on top of that, but she would at least get $45,362 a year, tax-free in perpetuity. So that's what makes us excited about this portion of the plan. So I know you might be asking, well, what if the market has a bad year or years? Because when we were first coming up with this plan, the first thing we did before we had an economic model built is we just did spreadsheet simulations about what if this started during the Great Depression? What if this plan was enacted in 1928 and we had actual market returns through the 1930s, which were, by and large, not good. So what would happen? So if in retirement, you're guaranteed to get a 4% balance, if the account dips below that, an automatic interest-free loan kicks in against your own account. In other words, to keep the account at a certain minimum balance. The loans also kick in to ensure that the account never goes below 60% of the retirement value, because a phenomenon we want to avoid is called drawdown. So in the investment advisory world, we tell people who are going to retire that a sustainable rate of withdrawal in retirement is about 4 to 5%, and that's what this plan is modeled on. However, if your balance shrinks to 60% of your original retirement balance, and you're taking 4% for yourself and 2% for the fee for the FAST, that 6% becomes, now it's a 10% draw, and that's not sustainable over time. So we have to avoid drawdown, and the interest-free loans kick into your account, maintaining that minimum balance until good years come, again, which they will in the market, and then your loans are automatically repaid. Now, during the time that that you have loans against your account, you can get no more than the 4% benefit that you triggered at retirement. But once your loan is paid off and your account grows, then you can get raises again. So hope that is clear. If we can ask questions about it later if we need to. What about current retirees? Someone who's already retired and collecting Social Security. What do? We still think that an individual like that would still want to opt into our plan just for the health care alone, because our health care covers nursing home care, which is not covered by Medicare. So a current retiree who opts into our plan will be paid out. The FAST, as I said, will issue bonds to pay off current retirees, and the 2% cash flow will eventually retire those bonds. They will be paid their current level of Social Security benefits, so the promises will be kept to our current seniors. And the U.S. government guarantees the bonds and pays interest on those bonds as long as the FAST is issuing bonds. That will no longer be necessary in somewhere between 30 to 50 years, depending on what you assume about market returns. But in the interim, these loans will be necessary, or the interest will be necessary to be paid by the U.S. government. Now let's talk about the healthcare side. That's the retirement side. The healthcare side is, the fact is that even after the Affordable Care Act, there are 20 to 30 million American citizens who are not covered by any sort of healthcare. And we want a truly universal plan. It's guaranteed issue, uni-age, unisex policy comes with when you opt into this plan, you get a guaranteed issue, uni-age, unisex policy, good in any state, completely transportable, no pre-existing conditions, and you can stay on your parents' accounts until you're age 26, just like the Affordable Care Act today. So don't worry, kids, you don't have to go out and buy healthcare just yet. There's a lifetime $1 million cap on benefits. So you get $1 million of coverage up front, but you can buy more if you need it. And you can spend this money really however you'd like, because it's your money. You can spend it on nursing homes, as I alluded to, when you retire. That's not covered by Medicare today. You can spend it on traditional medicine or non-traditional medicine, so-called alternative care, which is in great demand. I mean, right now, Americans spend tens of billions of dollars on alternative care, and it's not covered through many of their insurance plans. And under our plan, it would be. Now, when we say affordable, this is what we mean by affordable, because the healthcare premium, and this is just taking basically per capita spend on healthcare, if you divide it by every citizen, your premium would be about $11,200 a year. Okay, that includes, it's basically a $10,000 premium and a $1,200 health savings account. And the health savings account is guaranteed to cover any deductibles and copays throughout the year. And any portion of the health savings account you do not spend is returned to you tax-free at the end of the year. So this encourages people to take care of your own health, to get checkups, be proactive and all that. And then you get some money back at the end of the year if you don't spend it. But the $10,000 is the premium. And for some people and that's per person, not per household. So some people may not find that to be affordable. So what we have here is premium health. There are interest-free loans against your retirement account that you can get. If you are earning $40,000 or less, you can get 100% premium help through this loan. If you're married filing jointly, it's anyone earning less than $80,000. And then you can get 75% support for your healthcare premiums if you are earning between 40 and 50 or 100,000 married jointly. And then other steps down 50% and 25%. So one principle of our plan is no one pays for anyone else's healthcare. You have your own account and you fund it through your own retirement plan. If you have a loan, I will address what happens if you have an outstanding loan at the time of your passing. But first I'm going to address, what about the guy who never works a day in his life? How's he going to get, I don't want to pay for his health care when he goes to the emergency room. So how's this going to happen? All right, so let's just take a hypothetical person who gets off his parents' account at age 26, and opts into Plan for America, so he gets the health care coverage. Doesn't have a job though, so he doesn't have a retirement account, or nothing's being funded into the retirement account. But this guy lives for 60 years from age 26 to age 86. So 60 years, he's getting an interest-free loan against his non-existent retirement account. The premium, I'm round numbers here, $11,000 a year times 60 years. At his death, his retirement account is going to be, he's going to owe $660,000. But anytime there is a loan triggered, anytime there's a loan triggered, that's automatically paired with the life insurance policy. And the life insurance kicks in with any loan equal to the amount of the loan. And there's a small premium for that is also figured as part of the loan. I'm just doing round figures here. So he has a life insurance policy on himself for this loan. So at death, this $660,000 life insurance policy is paid into his FAST account. So all of a sudden, the guy who never worked a day in his life has a retirement account with $660,000 in it. Now, he has to pay back the loan. So the 4% that would have been triggered from the $660,000 goes to pay back his loan. The FAST does not want to take the whole amount and call it even, because the FAST wants the time value of money over time. So the $660,000, the FAST is going to take 4% a year for at least 25, max of 25 years. If the market does better, it will be paid off quicker than that. And then after 25 years or so, there'll still be $660,000 or more in the retirement account. And after that, the cash flow can then go to his heirs in perpetuity, someone who never worked a day in his life. So that's how we take care of those who don't have insurance. So I'm going to illustrate with another illustration. I talked to you about a 25-year-old. Why would a 25-year-old want to get in? That seems like a no-brainer. Why would a 50-year-old want to get in? Someone who's coming closer to retirement age. Well, one reason is you'd have no out-of-pocket healthcare costs. In other words, if you earn less than $40,000 a year, that is, because you get an interest-free loan. Your retirement is still what Social Security would have been, so you're not losing anything by opting into this. You'd still have some working years. You'd be able to contribute to the retirement account. So let's say if you paid in $7,500 a year for 15 years, even at 6.2%, you'd have a retirement account of $177,000. And you could get 4% cash flow off of that in perpetuity, in addition to your Social Security for the rest of your life. So it would be a nice retirement supplement. And you'd have a legacy for your heirs from that $177,000 account, plus any healthcare loans that you had. So once the loans were paid back, you'd have the life insurance in your retirement account as well. And then scenario number 3, why would a 75-year-old want to participate? Someone past his or her working years would not have a retirement account set up, but if you earn less than $40,000, you wouldn't have any healthcare premiums. You could use the healthcare for anything you wanted to, including nursing home care. You'd have your Social Security benefit would still be guaranteed. And if you had a healthcare loan, as with the guy who never worked a day in his life, when that was deposited into your account at your passing and the loan was paid off, there'd be a legacy for your heirs there as well. All right, this is the lines. This is under the 6.2% scenario. The blue line, that's the lower line for much of the time, is how much the FAST would have to borrow. So there'd be some serious borrowing over time, but by the time we hit about 2071 at the 6.2% scenario, that's when all unfunded liabilities are gone. And the lines would cross much sooner at 10.2%, our estimates around 2054. So when all the unfunded liabilities are gone, that 2% cash flow I talked about that the FAST takes every year to pay off the current retirees, that would no longer be needed for that. So that 2% would then go 50% to the federal government, 50% to the state governments to supplant the need of taxation of any kind. No taxation would really be needed anymore, because this would be then the source of government funding. There would be no income tax, no sales tax, no estate tax, capital gains tax, inheritance tax, nothing would be needed like that, because this would fund the whole enchilada. All right, we're talking about debt. During the transition years of this plan, the FAST would have to issue a significant amount of debt. And why do we think that would be better than U.S. government debt? Because the U.S. government has never defaulted on its debt. It's highly rated. U.S. government can always print money. Is one reason why its debt has never been seriously downgraded over time. But FAST bonds, for example, only have one use. They can only be used to pay current retirees or loan to current participants. So in other words, that money's in a lockbox. It's in a private trust that cannot be rated by the federal government. So we are restoring the lockbox with our plan that was rated for Social Security. The 2% funding mechanism will eventually retire the debt, and today the U.S. government just prints money. So there is no light at the end of the tunnel for the U.S. government to get out of its debt under its current scenario. And again, the U.S. government pays the interest on the bonds and guarantees them. So you have a cash flow mechanism that would sink or retire all these bonds over time. And so that's why we think, unlike the U.S. government, that's why this debt, we think, might even be higher rated. Other ramifications, and these are too really big to get into in any detail right now, but if you opted into the plan, you'd be an owner in corporate America. You'd have a proxy vote for the corporate governance of all the stocks on that index, and you would be the trustees of the FAST must provide information on all these executives for these publicly listed companies, how much they're making, how well they're doing by various metrics. And so this would ensure good corporate governance and really bring everything into the light. The U.S. would shift from a culture of debt to a culture of equity or ownership. And the once debts are retired, the 2% cash flow, as I said, goes to the federal and state governments as a source of revenue. If we do nothing, the entitlement deficits just go through the roof. We are not in good shape demographically in this country. The baby boom generation is in retirement age or entering retirement age right now. There are far fewer workers now to support them in retirement than there were when Social Security was founded. So we are kind of on a precipice, and we have to do something different, which I think you probably all realize. What can you do to help? You can certainly like us on Facebook and email us if you'd like to be on our list to receive updates on what we're doing. Introduce us to thought leaders. If only we had a president who loved big ideas, didn't have to worry about getting reelected, and wanted to leave a legacy for himself. I don't know if you can think of anyone like that. Let me know. We think the current president might actually like this. You can, well, of course, we're a 501c3. We're a nonprofit too. You can share a book, and we do have a podcast as well, available on Spotify and Apple and all the major platforms. And you can call your elected officials and tell them about the plan. Say, hey, what do you think about Plan for America? Ask your elected officials, and I wonder what your elected officials will say. So it's almost 8 o'clock. It is 8 o'clock. So that's about my time. I know I threw a lot of stuff at you. I'm happy to entertain questions briefly if you have them.